The bitter January wind seemed fitting as I stood outside what had been my home for 7 years, clutching only a hastily packed suitcase. My husband Richard's words still echoed in my ears. "I cannot believe I wasted years on someone who cannot even give me children." His accusation cut deeper than the cold. After 3 years of fertility treatments, multiple procedures, and endless doctor visits, he had decided I was the problem. The positive pregnancy test I had discovered that very morning now burned in my pocket, a secret I was too shocked to reveal as he methodically changed the locks. Through the window, I could see him already removing our wedding photos from the mantel, his expression coldly determined as if erasing not just my presence but our entire history together. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "My lawyer will contact you. Do not come back." Richard had already calculated everything. He had waited until I had quit my marketing director position for his recent corporate relocation, leaving me without income or immediate employment prospects. His family owned the house we lived in, and every major asset was protected under his name through careful financial planning. His timing was deliberate, his execution ruthless. As I finally turned away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, I never imagined that this moment of complete devastation would eventually lead to my most powerful redemption. I caught a glimpse of Richard watching from the upstairs window, his expression not of sorrow but of calculation as he made a phone call, unaware that the child he so desperately wanted was already growing within me, and that his actions this day would set in motion consequences beyond anything he could foresee. 3 days later, huddled in my sister Julia's guest bedroom, I finally gathered the courage to take another pregnancy test, watching through tears as 2 pink lines appeared even faster than before. The obstetrician's office confirmed what seemed a cruel cosmic joke. After years of unexplained infertility, I was 6 weeks pregnant. When the first ultrasound revealed not one but 2 strong heartbeats, the technician's excitement contrasted sharply with my complicated emotions. "Twins, what wonderful news to share with your husband," she exclaimed, unaware of my circumstances. During those early weeks, I wrestled with the moral question of whether to tell Richard about the pregnancy. Julia argued fiercely that he deserved to know, regardless of his behavior. "These are his children too," she insisted during our late-night discussions. But something fundamental had broken in me the day he discarded our marriage so coldly. The divorce papers arrived with clinical efficiency, citing irreconcilable differences, and offering a settlement that reflected how thoroughly he had planned his exit. His accompanying note was tersely businesslike. "Sign quickly and we can both move forward." Not a single inquiry about my well-being or whereabouts. When I finally contacted Richard's attorney requesting a brief meeting with my husband before signing, the response was immediate and chilling. "Mr. Harrison is not interested in reconciliation discussions and requests you communicate only through legal channels moving forward." The ultrasound image remained folded in my purse during that entire exchange. That evening, as Julia helped me search for affordable apartments, my phone displayed a social media notification. Richard at a charity gala, his arm around Vanessa Parker, the beautiful financial analyst from his firm whose name had appeared with suspicious frequency in recent months. Their obvious intimacy answered questions I had been afraid to ask myself about the timing of our separation. With trembling hands, I deleted the social media accounts connecting us and made the decision that would shape the next 6 years. Richard had made his choice with calculated precision, and I would make mine. I would raise these children alone, without the shadow of a father who could discard his family with such cold efficiency. The twins arrived in late August, Emma with her father's striking blue eyes and Noah with a determined expression that mirrored my own. Their birth certificates listed "Father Unknown," a legal fiction that felt both wrong and necessary. With Julia's support and a small loan from our parents, I secured a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Seattle, 3,000 miles from the Boston suburb where Richard continued his ascent through corporate banking. My marketing background proved valuable as I built a freelance business I could manage between feedings and diaper changes, working furiously during precious nap times. The early years passed in an exhausting blur of professional determination and maternal devotion. By the twins' second birthday, my client portfolio had grown enough to afford childcare 3 days weekly, accelerating my business development. When Emma and Noah turned 4, I launched Harrison Creative Strategy, deliberately using my married name as both shield and statement. The irony was not lost on me that the name Richard had given me became the brand that rebuilt my life. My company specialized in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation for corporations, expertise born from personal experience navigating life's harshest curveballs. By the twins' 5th birthday, I employed 7 people and had secured contracts with nationally recognized clients. Through strategic investments and disciplined saving, I purchased our first real home, a charming craftsman with a backyard where Emma and Noah could finally have the swing set they had been requesting since preschool. During these years, I maintained vigilant information boundaries. My social media presence was carefully curated for professional purposes only, with no personal photos. The twins' existence remained unknown to our previous social circle, most of whom had predictably aligned with Richard after our divorce. Julia, now living in Chicago, provided my only connection to our former life, occasionally mentioning Richard's continuing professional success and recent engagement to Vanessa. I had almost convinced myself that our separate paths would never cross again until the day my assistant placed the Boston Finance Journal on my desk. The headline read, "Harrison Financial Group expands West Coast operations, Seattle office to become regional headquarters." The accompanying photo showed Richard, now executive vice president, standing before the very building where I had scheduled a client meeting the following week. After 5 years of careful distance, our carefully separated worlds were about to collide. The Seattle Metropolitan Club hosted the annual Finance Innovation Awards, an event my largest client had specifically requested I attend. Normally, I would have sent my associate director to such functions, but Westlake Technologies had just navigated a difficult product recall under my guidance and expected personal representation. I arrived carefully late, intending to make a brief appearance before slipping away after the necessary networking. The elegant ballroom was already filled with Seattle's financial elite when I entered, scanning the crowd for my client's CEO. I spotted him across the room and began making my way through the crowd when a familiar laugh stopped me mid-step. Richard stood less than 20 feet away, champagne glass in hand, surrounded by admiring colleagues. 6 years had added distinguished touches of gray at his temples, but otherwise left him unchanged, still projecting the same commanding confidence that had once attracted me. I turned to retreat, but my client had already spotted me, waving enthusiastically. "Catherine, come meet the man who is revolutionizing our financial strategy." The introduction was unavoidable. Richard's expression shifted from polite interest to shocked recognition as I approached. "Catherine," he managed, his composure momentarily cracked. "What an unexpected surprise." Our handshake was brief, his skin cool against mine as our client enthusiastically explained how my crisis management had saved their company millions. "Catherine Harrison is the best strategic mind in Seattle," he proclaimed, oblivious to the tension. "Harrison," Richard repeated, his eyes dropping to where my wedding ring should have been. "You kept the name." "Professionally, yes," I replied evenly. "It serves as a reminder of important lessons." The conversation maintained its veneer of civility, though Richard's questions grew increasingly personal as he attempted to piece together my life in carefully measured inquiries. When he mentioned being in Seattle permanently now to establish the West Coast headquarters, I excused myself with practiced grace. Outside in the cool evening air, my phone displayed a text from an unknown number. "We should talk properly. Coffee tomorrow." The message signature simply read R. I deleted it without responding, but knew with sinking certainty that avoidance was no longer possible. The next morning, a delivery arrived at my office. A bouquet of white lilies, my once favorite flower, with a card requesting a meeting for closure. What Richard failed to understand was that the twins had school pictures scheduled that afternoon, pictures where Emma's striking blue eyes, identical to his own, would be professionally captured alongside her brother's familiar, determined expression. As I prepared to leave the office for the school, my assistant announced that Richard Harrison was in the reception area, insisting on 5 minutes of my time. Richard stood examining the company awards displayed in our reception area, his back to me as I emerged from my office. "Harrison Creative Strategy," he said without turning. "Quite the success story." When he finally faced me, his expression conveyed a calculated mix of admiration and nostalgia. "You have built something impressive, Catherine." The practiced charm that once disarmed me now seemed transparent, a negotiation tactic rather than genuine emotion. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked, maintaining professional distance. "We have nothing to discuss." His perfectly tailored suit and confident posture conveyed the continued success he had achieved, presumably with the freedom of unburdened ambition. "I disagree," he replied smoothly. "I am establishing permanent roots here. We should clear the air." When he suggested dinner to reconcile our past professionally, I declined firmly. His persistence increased, moving from requests to subtle implications that his new financial firm could either benefit or complicate my agency's future in Seattle's business community. The veiled power play confirmed that Richard remained unchanged, still manipulating circumstances to his advantage. Our tense exchange was interrupted by my phone alarm, the school picture reminder. "This conversation is finished," I stated definitively, gathering my belongings. Richard's hand caught my arm as I moved toward the door. "Catherine, please, I have thought about you often over the years. Leaving was—" His carefully crafted sentiment was interrupted by my phone displaying an incoming call, Noah's distinctive photo filling the screen. Richard's eyes widened as he glimpsed the image of a young boy with strikingly familiar features. "You have a child?" he asked, voice suddenly hollow. I answered the call briefly, assuring Noah I was on my way. When I looked up, Richard's expression had transformed completely, calculation giving way to genuine shock as realization began dawning. "How old?" he demanded, complexion paling. "When were you going to tell me?" The calculated control that had characterized our interaction shattered as understanding took hold. 6 years and 3 months, I answered quietly, watching the mathematical calculation play across his face. Before he could process this revelation fully, my phone chimed with a picture message from the school photographer, a preview of the twins together, their matching blue eyes and familiar features unmistakable. Richard's hand trembled as he stared at the image. "Two," he whispered, collapsing into the reception chair. "Twins." The moment stretched between us, filled with 6 years of unspoken truths as the consequences of his past actions finally materialized before him. The school photography studio occupied a converted Victorian house near the children's elementary school. I arrived to find Emma and Noah already dressed in the coordinated outfits we had selected together. Emma in a blue dress that emphasized her eyes, Noah in a complimentary button-down shirt and khakis. "Mom, the photographer says we are naturals," Emma called excitedly. The session proceeded smoothly until I noticed Richard standing in the doorway, his face ashen as he stared at the children. His unexpected appearance sent a protective surge through me. I quickly asked the photographer for a brief break and ushered the twins to the waiting area with activity books. Richard remained frozen, his composed corporate facade completely shattered. "They have my mother's chin," he finally whispered, recognition evident in his stricken expression. "Emma has your eyes," I acknowledged quietly. "Noah has your father's profile." The revelation hung between us, as Richard struggled to process the magnitude of what he had discarded 6 years ago. "Why," he finally managed, his voice breaking, "why would you keep this from me?" The controlled anger in his question ignited something fierce within me. "You made your choice very clear the day you changed our locks," I replied evenly. "You wanted me gone before I could waste more of your time." Those were your exact words, Richard. His face contorted with a mixture of grief and fury. "I had a right to know." "You had a responsibility to your marriage," I countered. "You abandoned that when you decided I was defective." The painful irony was not lost on either of us. He had discarded me for supposed infertility only to learn He had lost 2 children in the process. Richard's carefully constructed life was visibly crumbling as he processed the consequences of his actions. "Do they know about me?" he asked, voice barely audible. "They know their father was not ready to be a parent," I answered truthfully. "They have never lacked for love or stability." When Richard insisted on his legal rights, I remained calm, explaining that his name appeared nowhere on their birth certificates. His threat to involve attorneys faltered when I reminded him of the document he had pressured me to sign years ago, a comprehensive agreement with language waiving claims to any assets or outcomes not disclosed at time of settlement. His own careful legal maneuvering had created the perfect trap. Challenging paternity now would mean admitting he had known about the pregnancy when orchestrating our divorce, an ethical violation that would devastate his banking career and pending partnership. The devastating realization of his complete powerlessness in this situation registered across his features as he recognized the finality of what his cruelty had cost him. Richard's carefully constructed life unraveled with remarkable speed following our confrontation. His fiancée, Vanessa, demanded answers after discovering him reviewing our old marriage photographs late one night. When Richard finally revealed the existence of the twins, the engagement imploded spectacularly. Her family, influential in Boston banking circles, withdrew critical support for his partnership bid. Professional consequences mounted as Richard grew increasingly distracted, missing key meetings and making uncharacteristic errors in financial projections. Meanwhile, he attempted increasingly desperate measures to establish a relationship with Emma and Noah, sending elaborate gifts to our home that I quietly returned. His emotional emails fluctuated between self-pitying appeals for understanding and thinly veiled threats of legal action. I maintained firm boundaries, consulting with my attorney to document every interaction. The situation reached its breaking point when Richard appeared unannounced at the twins' school spring concert, positioning himself conspicuously in the audience. Though he made no attempt to approach them, his presence created exactly the public scene I had wanted to avoid. Several parents recognized him from recent business features in local media, creating a buzz of speculation throughout the event. That evening, I agreed to meet Richard at a quiet restaurant to establish clear parameters. He arrived looking noticeably diminished, his usual impeccable appearance showing signs of strain, his formerly confident demeanor replaced by nervous intensity. "They are extraordinary children," he began. "I just want to know them." For the first time, I detected genuine emotion rather than calculated maneuvering in his request. I explained my non-negotiable conditions. Any relationship would develop gradually, beginning with supervised interactions only after the children received appropriate counseling support. Most critically, he would need to demonstrate consistent commitment over time before any legal recognition could be considered. 6 years cannot be erased with grand gestures, I explained. Trust requires consistent presence, not dramatic entrances. Richard's frustration was evident, but the fight had largely left him. When he asked what he should tell his parents about their grandchildren, the question carried a vulnerability I had never witnessed in him before. "The truth," I answered simply, "that your choices have consequences." As we parted, Richard handed me an envelope containing documents revealing he had established substantial educational trusts for Emma and Noah, structured in a way that required no interaction or acknowledgement from me, a first gesture of responsibility without attached conditions. He sat in his car that evening, watching our house from a distance, glimpsing the twins through the window as they prepared for bed, the full magnitude of what he had carelessly discarded finally visible in his expression. 1 year after Richard's reappearance in our lives, the landscape had shifted in ways I never anticipated. Following our established boundaries, he had begun with monthly supervised visits that gradually expanded to regular Saturday afternoons. The children, initially curious but cautious about this new person described simply as an old friend of Mom's, slowly developed their own relationship with him. Emma, with her natural openness, asked direct questions that often left Richard struggling for age-appropriate answers. Noah, more reserved like me, observed carefully before offering small pieces of himself. Richard approached these interactions with unexpected patience, never pushing for acknowledgement beyond what the children offered organically. His professional life had undergone significant recalibration as well. After losing the partnership opportunity, he redirected his career toward financial education, establishing a foundation providing business training for single parents, work that seemed to offer more personal satisfaction than his previous ambitions. On a cool autumn afternoon, as Richard returned the twins from their regular visit, Emma casually mentioned learning about DNA in science class. "We did a project about inherited traits," she explained excitedly. "My blue eyes come from specific genes that are passed down in families." The perceptive glance she directed between Richard and herself conveyed an unspoken understanding developing in her 6-year-old mind. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Richard and I sat on the porch steps, a careful distance between us as we discussed this inevitable evolution. "They will have questions soon," he acknowledged quietly. "I want to answer truthfully without disrupting their security." For the first time since our paths had reconnected, we found ourselves engaged in genuine co-parenting dialogue rather than negotiation. "They deserve honesty," I agreed, delivered with appropriate context about complex adult decisions. As Richard prepared to leave, he paused at his car. "I was thinking about that day," he said hesitantly. "When I locked you out, I was so consumed with what I thought I wanted that I destroyed what actually mattered." The acknowledgement carried no expectation of forgiveness, only the weight of genuine recognition. 6 months later, at Emma and Noah's 7th birthday celebration in the park, the gathering included Julia and her family, my parents, friends from school, and Richard seated somewhat apart but definitely present. When Emma invited him to help serve the cake, a simple gesture of inclusion, his expression reflected the bittersweet understanding that he had gained a relationship with his children, but permanently lost the family that could have been. A new family photograph now sits on my office desk. Emma and Noah are in the foreground with Richard and me standing behind them, connected but separate, a visual representation of the complex family structure we had all finally accepted.